Okay, well, so obviously we have to start locally. I mean, we're rooted in Sacramento. I know you went to Kennedy High School. Your mom was a teacher in Elk Grove, and you're a black man from this area. I think that has such deep history. There's so much going on here. And so, as someone that is running for president now, how has the deep history that you have in Sacramento influenced how you're thinking about the world, how you're thinking about your presidential campaign, and just like life, like how you're viewing people and what your mother taught you? I know that's a lot of questions in one, but I think it's like there's the breadth to all the things that you're doing, and I think a lot of it might be coming from this space. So, just want to hear you talk about it a little bit.
No, I think that the question that you raise is really the most fundamental question in terms of who I am. And I don't think any other newspaper could raise that question because they just figure, they start in college. I said, no, 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 no. The most fundamental influence and shaping forces that helps account for the cracked vessel that I am, human being that I am, has to do with the majesty of Irene B. West and the majesty of Clifton L. West Jr., mom and dad, and my brother Clifton and my sisters Cynthia and Cheryl. The West family is at the core of who I am. It really is. Now, the West family is inseparable from Shiloh Baptist Church. When we came to the States in 1958, we went to Glen Elder, Glen Elder's the south side on the other side, not land parcel on the other side. And it was a black community, a thriving black community. But we connected with Shiloh Baptist Church since in Oak Park. So we go from Glen Elder to Oak Park every Sunday, sometimes more than once a week. Reverend Willie P. Cook and Deacon Hinton and Sarah Ray, my Sunday school teacher. These are persons who I carry inside of me every day. And it constantly want to put smiles on their faces. Now, we had the Black Panther Party that was right down the street in Oak Park. And the Black Panther Party had a tremendous influence on me because I learned the West family in Shiloh Baptist Church that greatness is better than success. And greatness is defined biblically. He or she is greatest among you will be your servant, will serve in terms of empowering others, ennobling others, enabling others, using whatever gifts God has given you to try to be of service to others. That's what greatness is. Now, financial success is a whole different thing, always subordinate. You can't be great if you're a coward. You can be successful and still be a coward. You can't be great without courage. You can be highly successful and have very little courage. So from the very beginning, I had that shaping and molding. And I've tried to be true to that. Tried to be true to mom and dad. Tried to be true to the shaping that I received at Shiloh Baptist, just that rich Black Baptist tradition. And it goes all the way back to slave days. Now, mom and dad took all of us to see Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, Memorial Auditorium. I was 10 years old. That's 1963. He only had 4 years to live. Never forget that thing. I didn't understand anything, but I knew he was for real. I knew he was the real thing in terms of spiritual and moral greatness. He wasn't that financially successful. And of course, he gets shut down like a dog in Memphis. But that, for me, Sacramento has always served as fundamental context to understand who I am because of West Family, Shiloh, and the influence of Black Panther Party.
Yeah, absolutely. I talked to a lot of educators in the region, and I was talking to Dr. Alan Rowe, and he was telling me how did the first MLK Day march at Grant High, and I was like, that's deep. That's something that he started, and now he's still an educator, and he's committed to Black excellence and Black youth, and not something you see, right? People staying for like for generations, noting the differences that happen over time, but how education can also play a role in your future success. I mean, one of the things when I interviewed him that he said to me was like, I didn't even know what education could do for me, what it could unlock, but I knew it was the key. And I was like, wow, I mean, that's in the 60s or, he was thinking like that. I mean, and now he's doing that for students. And so I guess kind of going a little bit back to like, your mom being an educator, you going through the school system here, in a time where I don't know if like, everyone was accepting, what was happening to Black people in this community. I think there's a little more awareness about that now, but at the time it sounds like, Del Paso Heights, that area, like a lot of things in South Sac, North Sac, like these areas were not being funded properly. And so a lot of this advocacy that I'm sure you did was grassroots, and how that kind of plays a role in how you're now looking, kind of doing a grassroots presidential campaign. I'm assuming that plays a role.
Oh, absolutely. It's funny, that as much as I loved books and ideas and was empowered by education, I was always deeply suspicious of the educational system for two reasons. One, too often it produced people who were arrogant and condescending toward other people who did not have a chance to undergo education and get credentials and so forth. And so the educational system oftentimes associated with arrogance and condescension, and I hated that. The second thing was that the educational system could so thoroughly miseducate people, because the frameworks that are often used in the educational system are so narrow, they don't really want to tell the full truth. You can testify of your years at Harvard that you met a whole lot of highly educated people, but in many ways they were miseducated. They were looking at the world through such truncated paradigms and narrow lens that they were very smart without being wise. They had sharp skills without humility, and they were obsessed with status, very little courage. And so I was always betwixt and between. And my mother, as both first grade teacher in the history of Elk Grove, and then as principal, she had that same attitude that she passed on to me. Don't you ever look down on a less educated person, that they have the same value as you do. And the second thing was always be very mindful that as you're being educated, there's blindnesses that are built into the educational system. And both of those I've never forgot.
Yeah, I think now the conversation is, talking about critical race theory, talking about all these different things. They're entering the dialogue. Like, we have erased history for so many years. And it's true, like when you're, and so actually, I wanted to understand what your educational policy platform might be, because I'm assuming if you're like me, when you're in the education system, you see all the flaws. I see the flaws consistently. I'm like, this is not built. It is built to oppress. It is not built to propel. And especially in Sacramento, you see, Black students are still underperforming. And I don't want to say underperforming, but like are not at the same level in terms of state standards as all other racial denominations in this area, or ethnic denominations in the area. Why? Right? Like, you have a very robust Black population. They're smart. They're willing. And like you said, it's never that they're not able to. It is, what are we providing these kids? And so even now, even after so many years, that's something that still continues to track in this region. And so I think that's a failure of the system, and not a failure of the student, that we don't have these things in place. So as someone that can maybe I know that, a lot of times school stuff is much more localized, but what is your education platform and how can we dismantle these things that have kind of been set in place to not help students succeed, students of color specifically succeed?
Absolutely. I mean, one was three things. The first one is that I'm an abolitionist when it comes to poverty. And I think it's impossible to talk about educational systems, be they in hoods, be they in barrios, be they on reservations, be they in poor white communities, poor immigrant communities. We've got to wipe out poverty. And the same is true of wiping out homelessness. We've got significant numbers of students who are in high schools and city colleges and other places who are still living in their cars, looking for a place to live. I was telling my beloved wife that if and when I win, I'm not moving into the White House until everyone has a house. That's what I learned in Shiloh Baptist. That's what I learned at the West family. See, that you're there to serve. And what that means then is when you're really talking about education, you have to come to terms with the background conditions of these precious children who are coming out of communities where they don't have enough food, they don't have decent housing, they don't have quality health care. So that I will begin with those background conditions. The second thing I think is very important is that we've got to demilitarize our schools. So we've had militarism abroad for so long. Let's come back now. Militarized police departments, militarized communities, militarized schools. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to learn when you're in a highly militarized context. And of course, all you need to do is to look at how the well-to-do educate their children. If they go off to prep school, there's no military presence, no poverty, 14 students in a room, 2 teachers in the room, and then they're told at least twice a day how smart they are, whether they're smart or not. Because you have to have self-confidence as a child. You have to have self-respect as a child. And these schools for the well-to-do are continually reinforcing the self-respect and self-confidence. Whereas in poor working class communities, often it's the opposite. They're told they're not worthy, they're not capable, either explicitly or implicitly. And I thank God we've got some wonderful teachers of all colors. I mean, I experienced that in Sacramento, Nola Shaw and Cecilia Angel, the 2 Vanilla sisters who were just magnificent teachers, made a big difference in my life. Bill Mahan, one of the great teachers in high school, a great track coach for me and my brother Clifton, Vanilla brother, and he was always a member of the family. So you always have certain individuals who go against the grain. But when you talk about policy, you talk about first hitting that poverty, homelessness, ensuring that you have both resources in the school, teachers who care, and then teachers who are affirming the students across the board. And because I want to call for the end of mass incarceration, which is a part of the militarizing experience of so many of our kids tied to the guns and drugs that are so abundant in poor communities, that part of my educational policy would be the moral awakening and a kind of spiritual renaissance of young people, especially young brothers and sisters of color, with self-love, self-respect. Don't have to worry about poverty. Don't have to worry about the guns coming at them. Going to schools with small classes, told how brilliant they are, how important they are, how significant they are, and that they can flower and flourish. I mean, that's the beginning, the kind of thing I would like to see, the kind of thing I would definitely do.
Yeah, that's so true. I used to be like an after school teacher and in like Mountain View, and I used to work at a low income housing site where I was the after school teacher, and they would come to me, and I remember some of the kids would just say to me, "I'm not smart," at like 6, 7, 8. I was like, "Well, who told you you're?"
Young, exactly.
Oh, yeah. I'm like, "Who
Uh,
told you you're not smart?" "Oh, I'm not smart.
exactly.
I'm not smart. I can't do this. I can't do that." I was like, "You can and you will." Like, what do you mean? And what?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it was probably just someone telling them or hearing, it might not even be intentional, but it was just that like if a teacher goes up to one kid and says, "Oh wow, you did a really great job. You're such a smart kid," and doesn't do that to the other one, it reinforces that
That's
dynamic.
true.
And
That's
yeah, and
true.
yeah, so I think that's what I think happened. I'm not totally sure because I always told them you are smart. I don't know why you think you're not smart. I never told you that. But it's coming from so many different spaces, and it's hard to keep track of, like, every person that's interacting with a child and being like, "I hope you said this to them, I hope you did this with them." Like, um, yeah, you're totally right. It is the environment, right? It's like all these other things that set you up for failure and reinforce that you're not someone that can be in these spaces. And I definitely myself have kind of gone through some of that. Um, actually, I read and I wanted to talk a little about it. I did read your essay on the new cultural politics of difference. And I felt like it was very relevant to this discussion, just like how you're approaching, this candidacy, how you're talking about it. And I wanted to ask you, and maybe you can even explain this essay a little bit to people who are going to listen or who I'm going to, basically write for, um, what that means, but also the idea of being like a critical organic catalyst. And if you yourself see yourself now as someone that's kind of doing that, because I was reading and I was just like, wow, I'm not sure where you feel like you fit in this dialogue, but it feels like maybe you're doing this now. And so, yeah, I just had a lot of questions about that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That's one of my favorite essays. About 33 years ago, we had a book called Out There, and it had everything to do with how an intellectual uses their gifts, brother, sister, sibling, whatever, whoever you're talking about, how you use your gifts in order to do three things. One, to provide insight, to bring light. The second, to provide inspiration so that people are inspired and motivated to want to both see differently as well as hear and feel and act differently. But the third one is you want to be an example. You want to exemplify the light. You want to exemplify the insight. You want to exemplify the inspiration so people can actually feel what you're doing, not just hear it in your words. It's almost like seeing and feeling a sermon without necessarily having to hear the sermon. That's what I mean by exemplification, fleshification, concrete bodily example. That's what best of black music. Stevie Wonder, you can write about Stevie Wonder all you want on the page, but when you hear him sing, it's a different experience. You can write about John Coltrane and Sarah Vaughan all you want in the magazine. Come to the club and hear them perform. That's concrete, and that's fleshified. That's concretized. See. And I think that's very important for each and every one of us in terms of our relational theory and practice and thought and deed. And that for me is what this campaign is about. See, this campaign is so deeply rooted in black music. It really is. And because the music is really about trying to walk the walk, talk the talk, sing a song from the depth of your soul that touches other people's souls so that they feel more illuminated and inspired and instructed as they live their lives. That's what happens when you really hear a song by a serious musician. See. And back to Glen Elm, back to Sacramento. When I was growing up, it was music, Motown, and the Stax, James Brown, Luther Franklin, Luther Vandross, Donny Hathaway, one and only Curtis Mayfield. That's what kept us going. And that's what still keeps me going. But it's tied to Shiloh Baptist. It's tied to West Family. It's tied to 10 years in Glen Alba. And then I lived 2 years in Land Park before I, went off to college. I was at 2 years. And blessed to be associated with Sacramento. I tell the world.
Yeah, Sacramento is it is a very unique space, and it has all these different, I mean, I think Elk Grove at this point is the most diverse district in Northern
Right?
California.
I didn't know that.
That's what I'm saying. The landscape shifted. It's so different than when your mom was.
I thought it was shifted. I didn't know it shifted that radically.
Yeah, it is the most diverse district. And it's very equally distributed, Black, Hispanic, Asian. I mean, those are the demographics we get. We don't get like the granular. But we get that much. So it's big, yeah, it's I think like, yeah, and the music history even in Sacramento and its roots in jazz have been so pivotal to music. I mean, I know that during COVID a lot of that kind of got lost, but it's still here. I mean, you have the Guild Theater, that's like a staple. It's been around for a million years.
Oh yes. And Derek Way Allen. He's one of the giants to come out of Sacramento musical scene. The same is true with my dear brother Jay. Jay King, Club Negro. Two towering figures. There's some older ones, but those are the two I think that are still going so very strong. And they are indigenously Sacramento, but international in terms of being renowned.
Yeah, I think when you're saying, how music is kind of, jazz music, Black music is kind of the soul and the heart of your campaign, it kind of makes me think of how, music really does unify people, right? You don't need to have language barriers. You don't need to really, you don't have to like say anything or do anything to be able to speak the language of music, which might just be listening or it might just be playing, whichever one you choose to do. And I guess the reason I had brought up your essay a little bit was because one of the things that kind of struck me was this idea of, everyone having a very unique identity, right? We're kind of like, this is me, and now we have this multiplicity of identities that people are embodying, and it's not this like monolith of a culture. And obviously that can be really, really good. And it can kind of also go the other end of that spectrum where it's contentious and self-serving. And so as someone that, you're going to be walking in, even though you're running as a third party candidate and you are speaking this language of music, how do you envision unifying like all these different types of identities that now, like, you'll see it in Congress, you'll see it in debates. And I know you've seen it in life, of course, but what is like how are you going to approach that? Now you're coming in from like this totally different perspective.
That's true. That's true. Well, again, like the jazz musician, let's say you take Mary Williams, Count Basie, they have their own bands. And the first thing they have to do is to respect the voices in the band. Those voices will never be unanimous. There's always going to be diversity in the voices. You respect the diversity of identities in your band. At the same time, we're all in the band in order to create a better sound and a better performance, so that the content of one's identity is not just going to be what color you are, gender, sexual orientation, trans, or what have you. You're going to have all of those in the band. But the fundamental end of the aim is all of them going to be bringing to bear their voices so that the band plays more beautiful music. And that's what solidarity is. Solidarity is all the various diversities coming together but focus on something that sustains their coming together such that they're using their gifts to empower others. Now, my campaign is evolves around those slides don't call everyday people, precious poor brothers and sisters of all colors, precious working class brothers and sisters of all colors. That's what the focus is. And you could come join the band. You could be well to do if you want to join the band, but you're gonna be focusing on Jamal and Letitia and Juanita and Jose and others who are poor and working class. This is the legacy of Martin King. This is the legacy of Fannie Lou Hamer. This is the legacy of Malcolm X. That's the legacy that I come out of. But it's always embracing, so that we're going to be concerned with white poor, brown poor, Asian poor, black poor, certainly, because I begin on the chocolate side of town. But we're going to be concerned with the most vulnerable. Who are the most vulnerable? Trans, gay brother, lesbian sister, non-binary, poor cis. I mean, it has a broad, it's a broad gathering of persons who are catching hell, whose backs are against the wall.
Absolutely. And I know you talked to Genoa about this when you spoke to Genoa, but you had your qualms with Obama's presidency and now maybe with even Biden and so I'm curious, like, what are things that you want to do differently that you have seen them do or have seen them replicate that you think specifically needs to change? And how are you going to make it happen?
I mean, it was fascinating to hear my dear brother Barack Obama talking today. You probably already saw that, saying that how we got to hit generational poverty and make it a priority. We got to hit racial inequality. And I said, well, my God, that's some of what I was saying for 8 years. And the Obama administration refused to do it. They opted for Wall Street rather than homeowners when we were dealing with the Wall Street greed crisis. And the same was true in terms of racial inequality. You have to hit mass incarceration head on. You can't talk about racial inequality in America without talking about mass incarceration, as well as poverty, as well as shattered families and so on. And then he said, you got to walk the walk and talk the talk. I said, oh, you're talking to yourself. Good God Almighty, could be put better. What a self-critique in that sense. That's what we were saying all of those years. And Angela Davis and so many others concerned about the prison industrial complex and poverty and what have you. And so, at this point, we just really, and it comes down to this. We have to be true to the best of America. And to talk about the best of America is to begin with Martin Luther King Jr. and Fannie Lou and others. That's what it is. Musically, when you talk about the best of America, you start with Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, Sarah Vaughan, goes all the way to Aretha Franklin, Mahalia Jackson. And it's not a question of skin pigmentation. It's a question of artistic excellence, moral courage, and willingness to serve others. And that means anybody can come in. Anybody can come in and do that, see. But it just so happens that this hated, terrorized, traumatized people, namely Black people in America, produce the highest levels of love and being wounded hurters, wounded healers, rather than wounded hurters, and chose to be those who didn't terrorize back. We didn't form a Black version of the Ku Klux Klan. We produced Martin Luther King Jr. It's a qualitative difference, moral and spiritual achievement. And it's nothing like Deuce Prince, Deuce Gladys Knight. You see, these are, and the greatest of my generation, Stevie Wonder. the highest level of artistic genius and love, warriorship in American music. And it's not just because it's black. He was a black man who chose greatness. He chose excellence. That's the message to send. And it's no accident that, I mean, I was blessed to know Tupac Shakur. He was in my classes when he was 10 years old in Brooklyn. His wife, his mother, Phoenix, was a member of the church, House of Lord Pentecostal Church. She had been a member of the Black Panther Party for many years. And Tupac Shakur, he has all that in him too. He's part of that same tradition. That same tradition. And we have to pass it on to the younger generation. This campaign is just a moment in the movement of a great people. That's really what it is. It's a moment in the movement of a great people. And by greatness, it's nothing exclusively black. It begins on the chocolate side. Just like the Sacramento Observer. It begins on the chocolate side of Sacramento, Northern California, winning all these prizes. But its truth, its beauty, its goodness is what? For the whole world. It's for the whole world. That's true in politics. That's true in music.
Yeah, I think a lot of the people that you mentioned and even your, affiliation to, okay, going back, I actually am doing an arts education reporting project. And in Sacramento specifically, and how access is limited, right? Well, first, it's been cut for many years, so it doesn't really exist, but then
That's true.
it just doesn't exist. But also, it's like worse for socioeconomically disadvantaged regions. And a lot of times in Sacramento, that is actually Black and brown communities not getting access to the arts. But, kind of when you were talking, one of the things I was thinking about is actually, and I knew this, is like churches and religious centers really do allow for access to the arts even when you're not getting it in school. Because excellence in, being excellent at music or playing an instrument, no one's getting that in the school setting, especially Black and brown students. So to see how many of those people, have come from that, and a lot of that is fostered in a religious setting.
That's right.
Despite religion being kind of a contentious space in some ways, but that coming from that space and finding, greatness, but also like amplifying the idea of what you're saying, like unifying people through music, I think is like, it's interesting to hear you talk about it, because I'm assuming that's also coming from your background in the church. So
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there's too much homophobia and transphobia and patriarchy in the church. There's no doubt about that. And for me, that cuts radically against the grain of the radical love of Jesus of Nazareth. But that's a theological issue. But it still has to be one of all-embracing love. No doubt about that. But the churches have been the institutional incubators of musical production. So you can actually, it's like going to Juilliard. If you're in Shiloh Baptist Church choir year after year after year after year, you get shaping and trained. And that's one of the reasons why so many of the great Black musicians come out of the church.
Yeah, I want to say specifically Black church too, because I don't know if that's really even formed.
I can't speak about my precious white brothers and sisters in their churches, because I don't spend a lot of time there. But I know I'm sure they had good music, but I don't know any Aretha Franklin that come out of it. Yeah. My Mahalia Jackson. I don't know any about. I'm open to learn and be informed. But
I don't think so. I don't think so either. I think like gospel music. I mean, I know we don't talk about Kanye anymore, but Kanye like really did kind of, bring that gospel music into the hip hop scene, which was amazing. And others did it before, but it's just, I do. And as someone who grew up in the Bay Area, for an immigrant family, right? Like, it was a very interesting experience because initially, you don't have that many people that look like you around you.
Right.
But then slowly but surely you start to like, that's, I'm saying Fremont was a spot. Like a lot of people
Oh, that's
coming.
that.
Yeah, that was where I was coming. And this I think you will find interesting. Um, so they converted a church into a Hindu temple in Fremont, and it's still like that. It's still it's still
That's
well,
amazing.
it is really crazy. So growing up, I would go to that temple. I mean, I also went to India, so I knew what Indian temples look like, but I guess my first introduction to temples was that. So I thought all temples kind of look like churches because we had like a second floor with an organ area, but I mean, we don't play the
Right,
organ. Like, so
right, right.
like, oh, this is like normal. And, there's a stage which you wouldn't have in a Hindu temple. But also, that is where I did. So I started learning a lot of Indian classical music and things like that because
Beautiful.
yeah, my parents were really into the arts, and you couldn't like get that kind of culturally relevant arts education in a school setting. So it's like, okay, who can we find that can like teach? And a lot of times, those practices, those events, or whatever would happen at church, at the temple, which was a church. So I
Mm,
thought that was a really weird cognitive dissonance of like, there's a
that-
temple, it's a church, it's like music.
That's fascinating. But you can imagine, though, just like the black churches have to come to terms, with their sexism, their homophobia and transphobia, that in the Hindu temples, with the rich tradition of Hinduism, you've got the challenge of our precious dollars. You got the issue of caste. And how do you make sure that you're embracing the humanity of each and every person, given legacy in traditions of Hinduism that have lost sight of the humanity of dollars? And this is true for every
Yeah,
religious tradition. There's no doubt about that. I mean,
I mean,
Catholicism, an anti-Jewish hatred that goes back to the very beginning of Christianity. It has to be checked, has to be examined, has to be pushed back.
yeah. I mean, with casteism, it's funny because casteism is also very relevant because California is trying to pass caste laws.
I know,
Um,
Sister D, Sister D, right out of the Bay Area,
yeah, yeah.
right out of the
Um,
Bay Area. I wrote the afterword for her book on
oh,
the trombone cast.
amazing. Yeah, we'll have to check that.
She's unbelievable. She's spoken many times in my classes in New York. But
Oh,
she's a
okay.
UC Berkeley undergrad, but grew up right there in the Bay Area. But she led the charge in Seattle first
Yes.
at the city council, and we won that one. And
Yeah.
now they're taking it to the state house. No, you're
Well, that
absolutely right.
yeah, they're taking it to the state, and then there was a Cisco related. I don't know if you remember this, but in like the Bay, like Silicon Valley, they had like a lawsuit against Cisco for caste-based discrimination. Actually, they won. Not Cisco, the person suing won.
I,
So they
I
set the
forgot
precedent.
about that. I forgot about that.
Yeah,
Though.
I'm definitely not for caste, but the one thing I always do bring up in conversations around caste, and you might already be privy to this, two things I always think about. One is that casteism was not part of Hinduism. It was brought by Aryans when they came into India and colonized it. So that's the first thing. The second thing, the word caste is not even from an Indian derivative language. It's from Latin. And all the Indian religions are either Sanskrit or Dravidian or like
Right, right.
yeah, they're not coming from so that I think that's a very good indicator of seeing like that it actually wasn't the culture of India. It was what was called like colonizers came, pushed it. I mean, the British came and they actually made it dogma, right? Because now it's in written form. You have to put it on pieces of paper.
Right.
That did not exist prior to the British Empire. So there were a lot of ways in which these things happen, and we've only gotten independence like 70 years ago. So it's a new nation. And so the Eurocentric lens that I see is that, oh, we created all these problems. How come you have all these problems? Oh, why are you doing that thing that we made you do?
No, I did. I did. Well,
Yeah.
but it cuts both ways. it cuts both ways because you see, on the one hand, you got the worst of Europe, which is imperialism, colonialism, genocide, subjugation, domination. But the best of Europe is so radically anti-caste, Marxism, socialism, even feminist forms that come out of Europe that have their limitations, but they are pushing patriarchy in ways that third world countries or countries in the global south can still learn from. So you can see there's always a best of India and a worst of India. There's a best of Europe and a worst of Europe. There's a best of Sacramento and the worst of Sacramento. And we learn from each other. King learned from Gandhi. Gandhi learned from Ambedkar, or at least was pushed by Ambedkar. Ambedkar was in correspondence with W.P. Du Bois, learning. And that's, again, that's jazz-like. You see, you got to learn, listen, humble yourself to critically embrace, but then take a stand and be willing to live and die for something bigger than you.
I love that. I love all of that. I know I've read the correspondences between W.E.B. Du Bois and Ambedkar, and it's so cool to see like what they were thinking about. Yeah, it was awesome. Like this, yeah. I love it. And then there's a lot of that actually. A lot of the Black Panther movement formed like the Tamil, like, Bengal tigers, and all these different things were like happening together because people were talking. And I do feel like we're in silos now. We're like, this is why I asked about the identity thing, because a lot of times like, this is my identity, you don't understand my plight. That even happens on the liberal end of that spectrum, right? It's like, this happened to me, did not happen to you, so you could not potentially ever understand what that is like. And I think what was really beautiful about those correspondences was that it wasn't like that. I was like, hey, we're going through this random thing, you're going through this random thing. They both kind of seem to be power struggles. What are you doing? Like, what's going on?
I mean, that takes us back to the essay, The Cultural Politics of Difference, where you're flexible and fluid enough to borrow and learn, but also you have to reject some things. There's some things about each one of our cultures that are worthy of rejection.
Yeah, I totally agree. I take the best of what I can from
absolutely
as many things as I can take from. Yeah.
It could be Buddhism with bell hooks. It could be atheism of James, or the agnosticism of James Baldwin or Audre Lorde. I mean, you got all of these different traditions have produced great people. Now, again, I admit that my definition of greatness is not Alexander the Great. It's service to the least of these. And that is a very biblical understanding. And so I've got my own Christian sensibilities there. But Christians, we know, have absolutely no monopoly on treating the least of these with dignity and sanctity. We've had some Christian gangsters and thugs of all colors that go all the way back to Constantine, Roman Empire.
Yeah. Sorry, I got a little distracted.
No, this is good stuff.
Yeah. Going, I guess, back to the fact that you're running for president.
This is all included because this is part of the vision, the best and the worst, different cultures, ways in which we talk about it, and we should be able to keep track of best and worst with any culture that we talk about.
Yes. Nothing is precluded to having faults, right? Like, I absolutely agree. And even with, with so I'm like first gen, but really like second gen. I grew up here mostly. So for my parents, like, it's me contending, right? Like, I'm like, here's what I think, here's what you need to learn, here are things. Because it's hard. And then like part of my family is Trini. So they have a very different history with the culture and so it's like you have to really talk about a lot of different, because even in Trinidad, even now, there's like the Indian party and the Black party, and they do not follow it. So it's like, well, here's why you should understand what people are going through. Here's why I would say that, maybe read about this, or maybe things are different. Political strife is a different thing than the lived reality of somebody's experience, like, yeah, it's very complicated, but I agree with you. I think like what I got to benefit from was that I got the space and the time to think about these things and really reflect on like what I wanted to take from my culture. And that's not something that my parents had the privilege to do because they were just trying to survive.
That's
So,
me.
you
Oh, you
know,
understand that? You
yeah.
understand?
Yeah. Okay, but going back to your running, I guess one of the questions I also had was I know that you're not into the two-party system. I am also not into the two-party system. But the idea of coming in third party, how do you know that this party will not uh, be prey to the same pitfalls that the other two parties have been prey to? And like, I know that there aren't even things that have been pointed out with the People's Party that have been questionable in terms of practice. And, I know what I'm discussing. So just in terms of like, how do you make sure that this party is different and not the same?
Right. Well, I think every group of organized human beings is prone to greed and corruption. That's true for churches, temples, synagogues, political parties, bureaucracies. You have to be vigilant in creating forms of accountability so that people are answerable to others and are not in any way above any standards. And so, I'm running with the Green Party now precisely because the People's Party brought with its own particular baggage that made it difficult to talk about the struggle of suffering and resisting for working people. Too many distractions. And so there's never any guarantee for any human institution that it will not become corrupt. So you have to be very honest and candid about that and very mindful of fighting off any proclivities toward corruption. I think the two-party system for me gets in the way of focusing on the plight of poor working people. We've seen that. We've seen that poor people, child poverty, poor people across the board remains the same. Neither party hits it head on. It's the thing that Martin Luther King Jr. was so concerned about when he founded the Poor People's Campaign in 1968. Same problem. In fact, it got worse now, given the grotesque wealth inequality. Was it 3 individuals have wealth equivalent to the bottom 50% of the population? It's 160 million people. 3 people versus the same as 160 million. The top 1% of the population have 90% of it. See, that's the redistribution of wealth upward. It's happened in the last 45 years. And it's a sad thing. And too often, the response of people who are being economically devastated is to blame the most vulnerable rather than confront the most powerful. That's why they're willing to follow a neo-fascist Pied Piper, Donald Trump. He speaks of their hurts and their frustrations, but then he moves in a very hateful and cruel way. And you have to be able to speak to some of those same people and say, I am concerned about your hurt. You have to be racist and xenophobic and sexist. You actually can move in a different direction, not following the same policies of a Democratic Party that has not hit the issues of mass incarceration, poverty, militarism abroad head on, but a third way. Here's the West campaign coming out of Glen Elder and South Sacramento.
Yes. I just love hearing you talk. I almost don't want to ask more questions, but so how, you kind of started this with, you have to be really aware that you yourself do not become corrupt. I guess the very natural next question would be, how can you ensure to us that you will not become corrupt? Because that's just a very, obvious question to ask.
Absolutely. And it's a crucial one because every human being has proclivities toward corruption. every human being can be very wretched because we are a very sinful species. There's no doubt about that. And the only thing that can break that is love and light and community to help keep you honest. And then as a Christian, it's divine grace. It's a power greater than me. All of that is still no guarantee. It's just the chances are higher that you won't fall into corruption if you have all of those. But human beings are human beings. And so you have to be vigilant. Love, light, community, accountability, and then some power greater than you. However people define it. I mean, different religious traditions define it different ways. My own Christian tradition calls it divine grace.
Okay, last question.
One more.
Last question.
Sure.
Okay. Can you just close it out for me? What is like a core memory that you had in Sacramento that, you've taken with you into life and has informed how now you'll navigate, running for presidency? Just like a very succinct sentence or two.
Oh, I have so many precious memories of Sacramento in life. I think it would be the indescribable joys of growing up in Cornel with a depth of Black love and Black community and Black encouragement. And it was in music, it was in sports, it was in our relations with each other. And of course, in the end, it was in the West family. But we were able to meet every catastrophe with compassion.